¿Quién es Miguel Musa?
Una persona de Hawái en el Atlántico.
¿De la cámara está prendida?
No,
No, casi. Espera.
no, tampoco.
Hola, ¿me escuchan?
Sí que él nos escucha.
Me escucha, correcto.
Yo
Sí,
estoy escuchando.
Se llama Miguel Musa. No sé si ¿tú lo conoces?
sí, lo conozco, pero el data está apagado.
Sí. ¿Qué se nos pasa? ¿Cómo se cambia esa cosa?
¿No? O sea, está este como micrófono
Sí.
y el
Miguel Musa, español, inglés.
en español.
Miguel, ¿me escuchas? ¿Bien?
Sí, sí, los escucho, perfecto.
Sí, lo escuchamos. ¿El volumen está bien allá?
Sí,
Dame un segundo, no te escuchamos. Estamos viendo.
sí, quizá se te cambió en el audio setting. Ahí. El- ¿Ahí, Miguel, nos escuchas?
Yo los escucho.
Yo te escucho.
Ya,
Nos
perfecto.
escuchamos bien.
Escuchamos bien entonces.
Súper. Hola, Víctor.
Hola, hola, Miguel. Estamos haciendo pruebas, así que qué bueno que te pillamos con anticipación.
Sí, parece que me
Sí,
conecté muy
parece que me
adelantado.
conecté.
No, está bien, en realidad.
Voy a conectar.
Esos son los instalados.
Sí, te lo tienen pidiendo.
Bueno, a ver, ya, pero no. Yes.
Hola, 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 hola. Hola, 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 hola.
Se ve así. Es que, bueno,
Tiene que moverse. Me queda la central.
no se ve en la mesa, ¿verdad?
Se ve la luz.
Ahí sí, la punta, no se ve.
Ya, ya, ya. FAPI. Ignacio, su espacio.
Mirando la presentación de como el Bradley es el miembro del board ¿qué ponía? Puede ser. No es tan complicado. ¿Vive en Chile? Que vive en Chile. Sí, debe ser él. Porque son el único que no tiene CMF. ¿Algunas preguntas? Se pone con las
Yeah, it's just the face saying for the people. So I think the camera will show the audience. And maybe the laptops through. Okay. You have enough battery or you take?
I think I have enough battery. I want my part in the other rooms.
Pues en clase,
Ah, tienes que hacer arriba.
no, semi arriba, en la razón.
Ya.
Estar a las 5, así de 4.
Hola, hola, ¿se escucha?
Mike, do you hear us correctly?
I can hear you fine, Victor.
Great. So we just wait a couple of minutes. I think and more OIDF members need to jump in.
Yeah, we might have one or two more. We had some, yes, we'll probably have Paulo from Open Finance Brazil join us in place of Elcio. So hopefully he'll join here soon. And that may be it from our end. Mark Kane and Gail are currently traveling, and unfortunately, Dominguez is not going to be able to make it last minute.
Sure. No problems.
It's okay, Joseph knows all the answers.
John beat me to that, but
I'm going to
Yeah, I
throw
think-
some at you for that, John.
I think between the three of us, hopefully we can. And Paulo, I'm not sure if one of the shared signals co-chairs will be able to join. I've just nudged them again, but let's wait another 5 minutes or so before we get started. That'd be great.
Sure, no problem.
Yes, it's very good. It's good.
Let me say.
Hola.
I've been to that, I've been to the house in the museum and stuff. I haven't been to that restaurant before. Yeah. I don't do any work in Chile.
Okay.
Done in North America. Because consulting I did with the civil registry, and it's like trading companies. I speak enough to get by, but not to have any kind of intelligent conversation. Hardly managed to. No. It's not. You only get so far with your
When I was curious, it was we are being for 14 years.
Oh, I tried.
I'm just really bad. I wouldn't know it if it ever arrived.
The camera should. Realizes. Mike, we're ready to start.
Great. Maybe if I start with just some housekeeping topics, and then you can help kick off the session, Victor. Just like the workshop, the Q&A sessions being recorded. You probably accepted that as you joined the Zoom session. Like the workshop, we'll publish this to the OIDF website like we do all of our workshops and sessions like this. We'll also provide the links to the CMF team to share with the CMF ecosystem. As we're going through the session, feel free to put questions into the chat. I'll work with Victor to field those questions as they come in. If you're more comfortable in putting the questions in Spanish, then Victor will help us with those. Those were the housekeeping items I had. Victor, if you want to get us started.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you all of you joining us for a rich and detailed discussion of FAPI 2.0 security profile. Let me introduce John Bradley. He's a senior principal architect at Yubico, widely known company as a manufacturer of YubiKey authentication devices. And John is also a member of the OpenID Foundation FAPI working group. He has authored a vast number of RFCs into this, one related to JSON Web Signature, both dynamic client registration, MTLS, and depot, to name a few. So, John, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Along with John will be along with our other OIDF members participating remotely. To answer a question from the audience about the implementation of FAPI 2.0 in the context of the Chilean open financing system. John, our audience today is mainly made up from representatives from different departments of the CMF, as well as representatives from different industry stakeholders that participate in the Open Finance System Forum. The Open Finance System Forum is a collaborative consultative body that is organized into 4 technical groups for the purposes of these works, namely infrastructure group, APIs group, security, and UX. The work forum is also organized through participation of a support team from the University Adolfo Ibáñez. And the link with the CMS is provided and performed by the CMF Innovation Hub. As Mike said, a few housekeeping points before we get started. This instance is designed to be a safe space for questions and answers related to work of the OpenID Foundation. It's not for a place to discuss the scopes, the attributes, the general rule that has been issued by the CMF, nor to talk about the slides and shadows, as many of you could have. For those questions, as many of you already know, we will be at your disposal to discuss them in the various participating instances that we already have. As a warm-up, this is some quite informal setting. So I will start with some questions we already collected in a small survey a few days ago that we made to the Open Finance System Forum. But obviously, anyone can raise a hand and to make a question to our guests. So just to warm up, okay. So I don't know what's turning on. Probably there's a light that indicates that.
Probably the.
And probably the
on-off
switch
switch.
on off. Typical solution. Thank
I'm
you.
an engineer.
As an engineer, and he already fixed the very first bug in the session. So one of the topics I want to discuss with you, John, is what is your recommendation for the creation of sender constraint tokens? And many participants in the Open Finance System Forum are waiting some kind of guidance regarding to follow MTLS or just to go through Depop. And we know that you were part of the drafters of such RFCs, so please go ahead and tell us your experience about it.
Okay. So mutual TLS really, isn't practical from a web browser for lots of deployment issues, which is why we came up with Depop. Using mutual TLS for server to server sender constraint tokens makes perfect sense. And I was the author of doing sender constraint tokens with MTLS in as an OAuth spec. So we have both. So which you use most likely depends on what the devices are that are what the device is that's sending the sender constraint tokens. Again, it's just not practical to do that in the browser. We are working on we have a working group at the W3C where so originally I was chair of a working group at IETF which did token binding, which was a way of constraining tokens to the TLS session. That got initial deployment, but then got a bunch of, because it didn't work with zero RTT and a bunch of things that Google and some of the other large players wanted, and it had the side effect of doing exactly what it was supposed to, which was breaking man in the middles, because there's a bunch of enterprise services which transparently man in the middle and doing token binding and as you will discover, doing mutual TLS binding will break a bunch of those enterprise. In fact, I believe the Wi-Fi here is going through some sort of firewall, which is doing the inspection and breaking a bunch of interesting things I discovered on my computer, trying to use the CMF LAN. So token binding was kind of rejected for some technical reasons and because it actually stopped man in the middle, which wasn't in everyone's interest, surprisingly enough. We're now working on, so that spec died. We are now working on proof of possession for session cookies and or other cookies. So you can, in the W3C incubator work groups, there is a proposed spec from Google and Microsoft that I'm helping them on, where you can create a cryptographic binding of cookies that will bind them to the browser instance so that they can't be exfiltrated. Because we're seeing in a lot of cases that a lot of the attacks that are happening are through cookie exfiltration. So there is work on that, and part of that will be being able to use that mechanism, perhaps in conjunction with Depop, to do the proof. And then is, you know, if you bind a session to the TLS layer, but then issue cookies that aren't bound to the TLS layer or to that browser instance, you may not have actually helped yourself that much. So now we're looking at being able to not only bind the JOT tokens, but to make it really useful, bind the cookies that are issued to the browser as a result of those JOT tokens, if that makes any sense at all.
What is the level right now of the development of this session cookies?
So it's in development. Last week we did a presentation to the Web Payments Working Group at the W3C. A lot of the credit card companies and financial institutions globally are interested in being able to bind things to specific browser instances to better manage risk. So we think that it will be in browsers, at least in the prototype stage, in the next 6 months, probably full deployment in year to a year and a half. There's still some details around what additional features an enterprise might be able to get at by essentially providing their own cryptographic elements for managing the cookies and stuff. But that is being able to cryptographically bind cookies to a particular browser instance is, at least on Windows, which is the most virus built platform. I love Windows. They're all the people at Microsoft are my friends, but the security model is well, not really a security model for Win32. We all know this. So Windows has lots of problems, more problems than the mobile platforms. But we're even seeing it, you know, it is an issue on Android, less of an issue on iOS. But we think that, you know, we have to deploy this mechanism across all of the platforms to try and have a better end-to-end security story. Because, you know, having, you know, your security is only as strong as your weakest link. So being able to know that the cookie that you put on a device is staying on that device and be able to trace the proof of possession all the way back up to the issuance is important.
I don't know if some of the participants want to go further in this question before to go.
If you're interested in that, it's in the YCG, the Web Incubator Group at W3C.
But I can try and
Sorry, Joseph?
could I just try and get a bit of extra colour into the MTLS versus Depop question,
Sure.
please? So I think what I would say is that I would hope that as an ecosystem, probably Chile should pick one of the options because that's going to be much better for interoperability. So I would suggest you do select either MTLS or Depop. And I'd similarly suggest you select one of either private key JOT or MTLS client authentication as well. Yeah, John gave a very good summary of the pros and cons, but I guess just to bring it back to an open finance, open banking context, we're really only talking about back end to back end cases. There shouldn't be people trying to do open finance calls directly from a web browser, I would hope, in most ecosystems. So you do have a fairly free choice. Yeah, so I think it's just a case of the industry players getting together and, you know, pretty much taking a vote on which one they hate the least or something. Not quite hate, but yeah, which is the least objectionable for them to adopt consistently for all the banks and all the fintechs.
That just in this sense, in the near future, something that could be, for instance, MTLS to be deprecated, because today the standard what we read about that is the implementers have two options, mainly two options. But some implementers could say, well, if you go through the default option or the most prominent option that the MTLS could run a risk to be deprecated in a few years.
I don't think it's likely MTLS would get deprecated. It does have some distinct advantages. It's really quite easy for the fintechs to implement because all they have to do is add a TLS certificate to the request essentially, whereas Depop's, I mean, Depop's not hard, but it is extra work compared to just adding a certificate. And I think in a lot of other ecosystems as well, we've kind of seen banks actually liking having a MTLS enforcement at the gateway rather than having application level filtering like Depop is. So that is a factor we've certainly seen other ecosystems pick, and I think that's one reason why we won't see MTLS get formally deprecated, is just because it does have those advantages. Yeah, so it's just a case of figuring out the pros and cons of the two and picking one. I think yeah, they both have advantages.
Great.
So the other, as author of both things, at different points in time, but one of the things that we also have to keep in mind is post-quantum. I know I was just meeting with the NSA a couple of weeks ago. That's thing that's fairly high priority on their mind. One of the nice things, as long as you actually appropriately secure your certificate infrastructure, there's probably less churn as you move to post-quantum capable TLS and TLS. So in some ways, you get a free ride on the transport layer implementing those protocols as opposed to having to necessarily wait for the application layer to implement them. That is another kind of consideration that someone might take, choosing one over the other. Like I say, at the server to server level, we did Depop mostly for single page applications that are acting as OAuth clients. Either works at the server to server layer, as Joseph says. Depop is perhaps more complicated than what you want at that layer.
Okay. I want to move forward to another question that we gathered before. This is about something related to the design for the open finance system. And there is a discussion currently in the working groups regarding the inclusion of data purpose limitation principle. I don't know if you know the concept that came from data privacy and how this concept related to the FAPI standard. Do you see any space for the inclusion of, for instance, sending the purpose of the use of data as part of the FAPI authorization process? I guess to put in context, this is a part of the idea to add a layer to prevent function creep. That is something that people are quite worrisome today. So, but I wonder if you have an opinion or any other member of the OpenID Foundation, what is the role of FAPI on that? Since the presentation in the morning, you stand for agnostic, whether in terms of governance of the flows surrounding the open banking exchange. So, what is your idea if something feasible and is feasible, it's something that could be addressed by the standard?
So I'll give my initial impression on that, and then Joseph can correct me. So we started, OpenID Connect was originally called OpenID Artifact Binding, and Nat Sakamura, who was originally working for the research branch of Nomura Bank in Japan, and I started it. And one of the original use cases, ironically, was in order to be able to have relying parties in their signed request be able to include signed metadata from a data privacy commissioner, so that the IDP that gets the request would be able to say, yes, you have, your privacy commissioner in Japan has signed that this relying party, Yahoo Japan, is allowed to collect these particular pieces of information. So that was actually part of the original design of OpenID Connect, was the idea that you could have a signed request and be able to pass on information from a third party about what your roles and responsibilities are. And I'm currently working mostly in the European EID space with European EID wallets, and also part of that is with verifiable credentials, creating a framework using trust marks so that you can have a verifier have a trust mark that says, yes, I have a legal purpose of collection for these particular claims from a European, it's called a personal identity document. Essentially, it's like your carnet in Chile. So in your e-carnet, so imagine that Clave Unica was, well, more functional and could provide selective disclosure attributes to relying parties. I have a whole list of things that they should do, but because they are based on OpenID Connect, or at least an old version of OpenID Connect. So being able to establish trust in whether or not you should release attributes is sort of one of the sort of ideas that we wanted to facilitate with OpenID Connect. Now, Joseph can talk about, there's a number of different ways that could be done. Joseph could talk about how, what the possibilities inside of FAPI is, but I think that it's, potentially an extension point.
Thanks, John. Yeah. So, I mean, we have some fairly similar legislation in the European Union and the UK called GDPR, which you're probably familiar with. Over here, the generally taken approach has been that it's for the third party, so the fintech in this case, to explain to the user what they're going to do with the data that they're requesting. And it does potentially become problematic if you start sending that kind of thing across to the bank, unless, as John was talking about, it's part of some kind of trust mark or some kind of third-party signed object. You're potentially ending up with a free-form string that's been passed across and that the bank's been expected to display. The two things that commonly go wrong there are people using it as some form of basis to actually disguise something else that's going on. So a phishing attack where people put lots of new lines in to hide some other content or try to inject some HTML to make things display and give the user a false impression of what's going on. And the other issue that you can run into by having the bank displaying that purpose is that it's could be implied to the users that the bank is taking some responsibility or liability for ensuring that the third party is actually doing what they're saying with the data. So in that kind of situation, it's kind of better to have the third party displaying that kind of purpose information when the user is interacting with the third party rather than after the user's been transferred over to the bank. Yeah, I think that covers it.
I think we have a question for the public.
Yeah. It's in the same sense that you're referring to. It's about regulatory alignment, because probably you don't know, but in Chile pretty soon we will have a new data protection law in force, and it's pretty much based on the GDPR and the PSD2 system. It's pretty much tributes to European legislation. So I was wondering how FAPI 2.0 aligns regulatorily with that kind of standards, and if you foresee any compliance gap that we should be aware of.
Joseph, why don't you go first?
Yeah, thanks, John. So I'd say, yeah, generally there shouldn't be any kind of compliance issues with FAPI 2 and these kind of data regulations. I mean, FAPI is built on top of OAuth, and the very principle of OAuth is that we're really getting user consent for the data sharing, which is usually the underlying principle of many of these things. Yeah, I mean, there are some other principles of GDPR that are probably not considered in scope for FAPI, like checking if the party that's making the request is actually authorized to request the data that's been requested, I guess. So yeah, we didn't particularly have to consider GDPR in any way when we were designing FAPI 1 or FAPI 2. It's just slightly tangential, I think. But go on, add your bit, John.
So the additional European regulation that is perhaps causing more activity in financial services in Europe is the EIDAS regulation, which will enable banks to use the personal identity document, or EID, of citizens to do things like set up, enroll for a SIM, enroll for a bank account. I'm working with potential on the cross-border company registration using additional sources of authority for whether or not somebody is a signing officer for a given company to create a new entity across European borders, or using the OpenID verifiable credentials specifications. And in that, that's where a lot of the new policy around who's allowed to ask for what attribute. So as a, let's say, let's pick someone. So somebody who's say a social network and has a financial service component, like Google with Google Pay or some such. So Google will have to go to the competent authority and get a trust mark, either a certificate in a trust list, or OpenID Connect Federation. We're still fighting over the exact mechanism. Just, people make their living fighting over this stuff in Europe. So based on a trust mark that they get for the purpose of doing know your customer, etc., they'll be able to ask for specific claims from a personal identity document, but only those claims, and the wallet will recognize the trust mark that they have. And then for authentication for other purposes or re-authentication, they'll use WebAuthn, or passkeys as they're now called, for creating a pseudonymous European EID, and the EID wallet will be able to provide both kinds of documents, either a WebAuthn purely pseudonymous document for re-authentication, or a set of claims from a personal identity document issued by the government, which can provide full name, address. Well, actually, there's only about 5 claims that are common across the European Union. All the other standardized claims are different in every country. But you can get that set of claims, or say just an over 18 claim for being able to do, or over 21 claim for doing ID validation. So what we're trying to do in Europe is sort of separate those 2 paths, where you go in, use your OpenID for verifiable credentials document for doing the appropriate identity proofing, creating that account, then issuing a passkey, which the user then uses for coming back in and using and doing re-authentication. Part of that is concerned by civil society about oversharing. You don't necessarily want people, relying parties, being able to ask for the person's birth date for any random website. So there's a lot of thought going into not only, not only asking for consent, but also providing a more concrete policy about, when it's, especially if it's government backed verified information that's more sensitive. So the relying party should be constrained, at least that's the belief in Europe. In the US, it's more the Wild West, because I guess that's where the Wild West is from. The states in the US are less concerned about who's asking for what. But certainly in Europe with GDPR, the notion is that relying parties will have to prove that they have a legitimate purpose of collection for given attributes. So there are ways, so I agree with Joseph, having RPs, and it's also a concern for the browsers. You don't want RPs being able to display arbitrary strings in the Chrome, which is part of the debate that we've had around secure payment confirmation in the W3C, etc. That's why all of those fields are carefully defined to only have financial values. Allowing RPs to specify arbitrary things that are going to be displayed to the user through the IDP is a bad idea. It's more reasonable if you have a privacy controller who's saying, yes, this is what you can display. When you talk to an IDP, this is what they should display on your behalf, and then you can drive automated things, automated dialogues at the IDP end to help people understand what it is they are in fact agreeing to.
A thought on that is that, yeah, sure.
It's actually a brief follow-up question from exactly that point. So, because one of the discussion is also being to what extent this finality should be open text, or a predetermined list of 4 or 5 fields. So if you're talking about 4 or 5 specific uses or fields, it would seem much closer to what you were discussing at the end, in which it's not any information, it's actually a code, a list. And in that sense, at least that perspective, would it be more mitigated, or am I missing something?
And for the secure payment confirmation in the browser, which is implemented in Chrome, you may or may not have seen it. The 3D secure people are mad keen on it. So all that UX is driven by sending, one means this, etc. So at no point is the browser ever going to display an arbitrary string from the relying party, because there's lots of bad things that can happen. So yes, if you can agree on if you want to have something displayed that's communicated by the relying party, either coded or potential, it should be a code which the IDP knows what strings to display in the result of that code. I'm not saying whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing to do. What I'm saying is displaying and getting the IDP to display an arbitrary form string has known bad consequences.
I think that you stress, you and Joseph, what are the trade-offs to try to have a solution from a privacy or data protection perspective to free flow information regarding which is the purpose of the processing of data, and what could happen if such idea to inform from the relying party or to the bank could go wrong, especially if it's an arbitrary code, malicious code, or anything that could be so open to transport things that you don't want to transport. When you talk about a secure payment confirmation, it's obviously that the amount of data is quite specific. You want to know the face value of the transaction, which is the payer, the payee, that kind of stuff. I'm just wondering that probably one of the things that I guess Joseph highlights is that how problematic it would be if there is a lot of purposes, especially in our open data system, and especially because you want to inform to the users and have a informed consent that try to fix or try to have a solution that could imply another problems to the standards. And I think at the end of the day, it's part of the limits of the scope of the standardization. You can standardize something that you already know, which is the use of that data. So it's important what you say about, for instance, the trust marks. It is a specific legal device in Europe, in the European Union, to certify something. And it could be other kind of data that implies the same function. Right? This is a very good question, see if this standard can allow to enhance data protection, but what are the outcomes or possible trade-offs in order to do that? And in fact, Kevin is part of the support team of the Open Finance Forum, and is part of the discussions in technical groups, because obviously you want to transport the information in a way that is not only syntactically comprehensible, but semantic and a full interpretability. But what is the outcome of that? What is the trade-off in order to do that? So I just want to jump in, but I don't know if we have some additional comments on that. We know that data protections and the relation of the crossroad with FAPI is a very contentious topic. So please, if somebody wants to raise a hand, go ahead. No? Okay. Another question that we collected before is regarding to embedded finances, and more specifically, what if, for instance, a reliant party is not the entity that will perform or render the service for the end user, just a white label maker or an application that will be used by another third party. So, for instance, in some open banking schemes, there is another layer of third-party providers that related or have an agreement with TPP regulated by the open banking entity, but the authorization is enough to authorize a third-party user. So what is your, I don't know if you see a problem in terms of compliance with FAPI, with this kind of authorization that at the end of the day are managed for and by third parties, as if a third party that wants to render a service for the users and not specifically the relying party. The relying party only wants to collect and gather the authorization and then transfer the information to an entity that is the actual financial entity that wants to render a service. This debate in Chile was put it in the umbrella term of embedded finance, but in order to be addressed as a question, the idea is to go to FAPI standards stand for third parties that want to have a piece of this authorization gathered for an unrelated party.
I guess at lunch, we were talking about Stripe, who I think
Exactly.
it would qualify as that sort of entity. So certainly in North America, Europe, there are those sorts of entities. I'm guessing in the UK as well. I don't believe that there's any. Is this working? Can you still hear me, Joseph?
I can, yep, John.
Sorry. So I don't believe there's any impediment to that sort of setup inherent in FAPI 2.0. There are additional complications where you are potentially passing stuff through third parties that we've looked at with WebAuthn and 3D Secure, et cetera, but those sort of layer on top of the FAPI 2.0 specs. But yeah. Joseph, do you have comment on that?
No, I think you covered that, John. Thanks.
So yes, you should take that architecture into account. Or you'll be annoying the people who make their living doing those sorts of things.
No.
Well, that's my personal opinion.
Well, I don't know if somebody wants to add, especially think about it.
I know that in Europe, yes, there was a financial aggregator that worked with a bunch of banks and was essentially, so they were one of the main architects, one of the main groups that contributed to the standards. So a lot of the people who contributed to the FAPI standards were exactly those sorts of middle operators who wanted things standardized to make their business model easier.
And as a context in the middle of the public hearings we have about the regulation that the CMF already issued on open finance, a figure that's like kind of data aggregator was proposed by some participant from the UK. Said data aggregators at the end of the day, there's the kind of middleman that you really want in open finance systems. But the concern is that at the end of the day, we are requiring all the data protection, security elements to a party that will not be part of the rendering of financial services. It's just a part that collects the data on behalf, not only on behalf of the end user, but on behalf of another entity that these entities don't want to render the services. But this is something that was raised in the public hearings because some open finance systems already recognize that figure of data aggregators or data brokers in a limited sense of that. Those brokers could be any kind of intermediary, and some others not. So I think it's still an open debate on that.
Right, so I think that recognizing them is important, but I don't think that means cutting them any slack. They should be held to the same privacy, security, and integrity standards that the other parties in those transactions are being held to. This just because there's a middle operator doesn't mean that people deserve lower security in their transactions. It's like dangerously. We should probably stop talking.
I'm totally agree with that. I think we have a.
Yeah, it's on the same topic. What about from the user experience point of view? For instance, the client name, what should be the data aggregator or the third party that is collecting the data and is more known to the user? Because that, how wide level the data aggregator can be in standard. The client is only one, the logo is only one, so how do you recommend we tackle that? I don't know if the question makes sense.
that could be dealt with a number of different ways. Joseph probably has more details than I do. In some ways, how the authentication is going to work may have a bigger impact than anything else on how the various parties are labeled. Again, if you're using something like WebAuthn that's bound to the RTID, then the user is going to, in their browser, be presented, I'm authenticating to Stripe, not I'm authenticating to Banco de Chile. So it is, I don't deny that there are UX complexities that need to be worked through. Joseph, do you have?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's definitely a good question, and I think to some extent you have to also think about what the legal position is in terms of what rights the aggregator gains to the data in the process. Obviously, if they are gaining some rights, you need to inform the user that the aggregator is involved as well. I think in the UK, and I think probably generally across Europe, but I'm not so sure about Europe, but I believe also in Brazil, there's not really been any attempt to treat the aggregators specially. They are just viewed as a fintech in the rules of the regulation. And again, someone from Brazil might be able to correct me here if I get this wrong, but I believe because some of the entities have to be regulated as well. So it's quite common that the aggregator is regulated, but the aggregator's end customer, the kind of fintech that's actually getting the data, is not regulated. So to some extent, it's the aggregator that's actually on the hook for the regulatory obligations and hence should be shown to the user. But yeah, I mean, there is always the potential option that you let the aggregator register multiple clients so that it can have a client for each of its end customers. That can potentially work well. That generally does potentially shift the burden, I think, at least in the UK, to the point that those companies that have a client that's specifically for them then shift into the realm of being the regulated entity. So again, you have to be really careful with the legal situation here. So yeah, I'm not sure that actually answers the question, but maybe it gives you some extra questions to ask.
It does. Thank you.
And I commented that I think I agree with you, Joseph and John, because it's highly dependent on the legal setting. If you have a different patchwork of pieces of law regarding one particular requirements for the entities that are regulated by the open banking regulations, but are different settings for the aggregators as a data controller, data processor in terms of data protection requirements, obviously it could be a gap, and this gap could be used in a way that none of those regulations want to be used. So, as the commentator said, we are already passing an omnibus reform to the data protection law, try to be quite similar to the GDPR. But I think we are probably in a very good position because the PSD2 was passed before the GDPR. 1 year that made a lot of difference in terms of consent, in terms of authentication, in terms of and in fact, PSD2, when it said the user must consent, there's a lot of discussion. Is the same consent in terms of data protection? It's something different. And the PSD3 said, no, forget about consent, please name it authorization. The user, in terms of open finance, authorize the access and need to consent as any other legal background to fulfill a legitimate processing of data. So I think we're in a very good position to have that. Those pieces of regulations have a lot of commons, but difference too, and how to not create a gap is quite important. And I have a question that it seems to be a very high level, but please be free to give any comments that you have on that. How do you see the existence or customizations or eventual deviations for some kind of plain vanilla FAPI 2.0 standard for each jurisdiction, namely the flavor for Brazil, the flavor for UK, and the flavor for Chile? And because we don't know, we're in the middle of the process to know we should go forward to make some customization, but it could be a problematic in terms of to follow any other recommendation of the OpenID Foundation in the future, or material change of the standards, because we have a particular flavor that we at the end of the day, we will cost a lot of money to go through the next version or upgrading that. So what kind of consideration should we take in account if we see that this some kind of customization is needed to that the system goes smoothly in our jurisdiction?
Victor, I'll pull up and look into this. We can repeat.
Sure, if you want,
Right.
if you want to add something else, go ahead.
Yeah, in the same order of ideas, what are the plans in the future updates of FAPI? How might that impact long-term strategy and implementation?
Well, I'm probably going to give another engineering it depends. So in general, the fewer customizations you make, the fewer changes to, the goal, one of the goals with FAPI is that companies that provide the software to banks and other financial institutions can have standardized versions across, create one version, and that doesn't need to be wildly customized for individual jurisdictions. Back in my youth, I worked for Ping for a number of years, which some of you may be customers. I'm sorry. Having to go and make specific changes for jurisdiction, basically drives up the cost for software vendors like that. So the fewer things that have to be customized on the software side can help lower costs and maintenance costs for the people who are deploying it. On the other end, it would be nice someday to have cross-border APIs. That's more likely to happen in Europe than potentially in Chile, but maybe someday. It's not inconceivable. If it were easier for me to open up a bank account in Chile, that would have been nice a decade ago. But there's also certification infrastructure, et cetera. The OpenID Foundation having to create custom certification tests for every country adds to our costs and what we have to charge people for certification. So it really will depend on exactly what the customization is. Using I noticed on your Wi-Fi you have your own CA root authority for your certificates. No, because I had to compromise the security on my laptop to join your Wi-Fi. I'm sure other people have mentioned. So clearly you like certificate authorities since I used to run one. I appreciate, I understand. It was a good business once upon a time, and perhaps still is. So a customization saying, the CMF is going to run the root CA for all of these certificates that banks are going to use to interoperate. Certainly the UK did that, and other countries done that. So that kind of customization probably doesn't impact the infrastructure changing, adding additional parameters, taking them out, changing schemas, etc., will have more of an impact. So it depends on exactly what things you want to customize as to what sort of impact that's going to have. I don't know, Joseph, any of the others want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing to be cautious of is just to make sure that you don't customize something in a way that is actually kind of contravening something that's actually written in FAPI standards. So yeah, you shouldn't decide to just invent new client authentication methods or pick a different one. That would clearly be against the kind of goals of FAPI for interoperability, and it would also invalidate the formal security analysis. I mean, you don't have that background to build on. But I mean, we absolutely do expect ecosystems to actually do some customizing. We'd call it profiling. Like I was mentioning, you should select just one type of client authentication, just one type of sender constraining for the access tokens, because that greatly aids interoperability and makes everything a lot simpler. And there's other things that you'll definitely need to define, like, if you decide to use RAR, rich authorization requests, you'll probably have to define your own authorization object there to, specify what the fintech is actually asking for permission to do from the bank. Those kind of customizations are all very much expected and something you should do. And I mean, straying slightly outside the boundaries of customizing FAPI itself, there's definitely other areas that we would expect you as an ecosystem or a regulator or some kind of central governing body, things you need to make and standardize on. Like, for example, in the UK, they standardized the consent screens. That was because before they did that, each bank was coming up with their own consent screens. And I think one bank managed to invent one that had about 20 clicks between the user getting sent to the bank and them actually managing to authorize the access, and with all kinds of scary warnings in the way. And obviously the experience was also very different between the different banks, which didn't help put the users at ease, because for open banking to really be successful, you have to be putting the users at ease so that they do actually authorize the third parties to access, and having consistent consent screens with clear agreed language is a good way to do that. I think certainly during that process in the UK, I think a lot of lawyers made a lot of money debating over exactly which word should be used for consent and some of the other phrases. And yeah, I think there was a question about kind of what upcoming changes there might be to FAPI. And I mean, I can't officially represent the working group, of course, but I think at this point we're really hoping that FAPI 2 is going to be the thing for a while, and that it's had a lot of work go into it, and there is nothing that we're aware of that might change FAPI. Probably the exception is exactly where post-quantum cryptography goes, as John kind of hinted at earlier. So that's the only thing we can see on the horizon that might really need changes to FAPI. So the things the working group actually plans to do over the next few years is, for example, there's an implementation and deployment advice document that we have that goes alongside FAPI 1, which it's not terribly detailed actually, and there is one for FAPI 2 that's very basic. So we want to build out that document and have a bit more advice in that document. We want to kind of get the grant management spec finalized and over the line, and actually see an ecosystem use that and give us feedback, because we really need some feedback of people that have really used it in a proper ecosystem to tell us if it really solves the problem we tried to solve or not. And trying to remember if there's actually anything else that we expect to do in the FAPI working group. I think those are probably the big ticket items. So, there's still some work to do as well. We've got the message signing spec that we've not finalized yet, and there's still more work to be done around the HTTP signatures spec, again, because we don't have quite enough people that have implemented it to have the experience to know it solves the problem before we take it to final.
So I'll add a couple of other things, as Joseph mentioned about post-quantum. as one of my hats is chair of the Jose working group at IETF. So we are working on standardizing the MLDSA algorithm, otherwise known as dilithium, for signing Jose objects, JSON Web Tokens. So as we finish that work in the IETF, OpenID Connect and things in FAPI that use signed JSON objects will inherit that work. There's other work which is also happening in the OpenID Foundation, which if people are interested. So as part of EIDAS regulations, so there is a large-scale pilot called EWC in Europe, which you can look up on the web. So that is looking at how to use the European identity wallet for payments and to do transaction binding, etc. So there is work happening right now as a result of requests from the EWC pilot to Visa, MasterCard, in the OpenID DCP working group, where we're looking at being able to add transaction request information to a very verifiable credentials request, so that as an example, you could have a European identity wallet that had a Visa card or some other bank instrument in it as a verifiable credential. The verifier would pass in transaction information, which would be displayed in the user's identity wallet, and then signed as part of that verifiable credential, and various claims from that verifiable credential would then go back to the merchant or whoever the verifier is. So that intertwines with the Payment Services Directive. They all come from the European Commission, but don't necessarily neatly reconcile. So all of the sort of next generation stuff in Europe around payments is kind of focusing on verifiable credentials, which is another thread of work that's happening in the OpenID Foundation. So the European Architectural Reference Framework is all based on OpenID for VP and ID for BCI. So if you're interested in where some of this may be going in 5 years, so that's probably an add-on on top of the FAPI API stuff, but there is other stuff besides FAPI that relate to financial services that is happening in the OpenID Foundation.
Very, very good insights from both of you, and in fact, very good tip regarding what would be in the next 5 years. We will try to make a link between the trust services and open finance system. 2 years before we roll out the law that required the establishment of the open finance system, but we don't have from the other side, beside the digital signatures, we don't have QCOs or QWAC from the IDAS regulation, and it's clearly that there's a demand to improve the relationship with trust services. In fact, one of our first approach was to rely upon one of the typical certificates that are already issued by the CAs for digital signatures, but they have a lot of problems to use that to open finance because they're not designed to do that. So it's a gap in terms of trust services. Very, very good. Your tip regarding which will be the future in that. And I have a question that probably has an engineering part, and I don't know how to say the other part that is not the engineering part.
Okay.
Policy.
I don't have non-engineering answers.
Okay, so it could compromise engineering and non-engineering part.
Joseph is looking like, oh, I want to answer the non-engineering part of the question.
So we look at the stack of FAPI 2.0, the security profile, the attacker model, and one of the things that many people ask is, what about the OAuth message signing? And what about the grant management? That seems, and please correct us if we're wrong, have a different stage of development, even they are part of the same stack. So we have some advisors that said, for instance, that instead signing is still a little gap between the FAPI 2.0 security profile and grant management is a very good idea to be deployed instead an API for consent. But there's still in a different stage of development. So in the morning you present the full picture, the FAPI 2.0 stack. So what is, I guess that FAPI 2.0 security profile could be implemented with the elements that you already drafted in it. But since it's related to another standards, or at least refer to them, and that the standards have I don't know, a different speed or stage of development, what would be or your recommendation on that, especially because when we saw FAPI 2.0, we saw it as a whole. So it's a full stack of components of the standard. So I don't know if we need to, for instance, have a more flexible approach in message signing or in grant management, or it's more on an optional requirement, not a mandatory one of the security profile. And what is your opinion on that?
My opinion is Joseph should answer it first.
So it's non.
Yeah.
Okay.
The OpenID Foundation works, a lot of us work both in IETF and OpenID Foundation, and not all specifications proceed as fast as one would want, and it's hard to synchronize them. So Joseph should answer.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think the question about message signing, it is actually really a non-technical question. We're confident that the security properties of FAPI are met just by using the security profile. The message signing spec is an optional component on top of that, which in itself has several optional components within it. So it essentially comes down to there may be legal reasons that you want to use some of those things. So, for example, I'm trying to remember, one of the jurisdictions decided as a policy that they wanted the request objects passed to the PAR endpoint to be signed. That was for what we term, and it's a horrible word, non-repudiation purposes. Which basically means that they felt there was a need for the bank to be able to demonstrate in the future that a fintech had actually sent a particular request to the bank and the details of what was requested. So we very deliberately made that an optional module in FAPI 2 because, but not everybody will need to do that. And we would discourage you from requiring signed requests unless you can see a very clear legal reason that means they're necessary, because otherwise it's just extra complexity and more things that can go wrong. And so there are several different parts of FAPI message signing as well. And actually, one of the parts that's currently in there is signed HTTP requests. We're actually going to split that out into a separate spec for various reasons, but that is something that has been used across a few ecosystems. They've felt that they need signed requests when the fintechs are initiating payments. They wanted, again, that non-repudiation property essentially, and maybe some small extra security element, depending on exactly where TLS is getting stripped off in the architectures on either side, or where it's been added in the architectures on either side. And the FAPI HTTP signing, it's relatively new, and it's based on an RFC that's relatively new. There is a much longer history of people actually doing signed messages over HTTP in various different ways. So both Brazil and the UK do it in slightly different, non-standardized ways. So the FAPI way is a way to try and actually standardize that. So it is the approach we'd recommend you try if you do need signed HTTP messages, rather than copying exactly what Brazil or the UK or Saudi did. And people asked about grant management as well. Again, it's something we'd recommend you use. It's not a spec that's at final yet, and the reason it's not at final yet is we've not had an ecosystem actually try and use it, as I think I mentioned earlier. So the problem is, once we've taken a spec to final, we can't then make what we call normative changes to it to actually fix things if it turns out that we've not actually got it quite right. So we really want to see an ecosystem adopt that spec and give us feedback on it before we actually take it to final. But it does definitely solve a problem, and it helps standardize something that, again, the UK and Brazil have been taking different approaches to. So yeah, it's definitely a spec. I suspect as other open banking systems have had this problem, you're likely to have that same need. So I would encourage you to look at the grant management spec and try and adopt it.
Great. And in fact, this is a helpful word because of legal jargon, non-repudiation, and we are in the early stage of this discussion because some, especially payment transactions, need to be final, and there's some non-repudiation being involved. So one of the first approach was using the current available tools for non-repudiation. That's based upon digital signatures, but are not designed to be part of the interoperable systems, just to be used by a custodian and repository of documents and signing those documents. So it's part of an ongoing discussion here. So I think this recommendation will be so valuable for work. And I have a question that
I have a last question.
Yes, we have a comment from the audience.
Thank you very much. You have addressed the many complexities in when we're facing the implementation of open finance, and as you may know, the enactment of the fintech law in Chile is fairly recent. I would say a couple of years. So in this scenario, do you believe that it's important to have a recommendation of a gradual way of implementing open finance according to FAPI? I mean, it is fairly necessary to move from to a 100% scenario, considering that we're building a highway whose traffic we do not really know what will be in the near future. Would be important to factor in this experience, the international experience regarding the implementation of this technical matters in order to adopt a more, let's say, tailored approach, instead of making significant upfront investments in fully scale system of which that we don't actually know the use that is it going to have. What would be your view in this matter? I mean, what is your experience in implementing this kind of technologies?
So my experience through some of the countries that have gone through this is that you really have to hold your breath, take the leap, and you're either going to be interoperable or you're not. Some of the European countries that haven't chosen FAPI, have wound up with open banking systems where banks can't actually talk to each other. They've implemented completely incompatible APIs. So I would say that, you know, whatever you choose, you should probably try and get everyone to implement it. Now you can phase that in, but allowing people to pick different flavors of it, probably is just going to increase the pain over time. I would defer to some of our Brazilian friends, et cetera, for their implementation experience.
Paula,
Yeah,
do
I
you
mean,
want to chime in on this? I'm sorry, Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, go on, Paula. Go ahead.
Here in Brazil, on our first version, we were thinking about building a solution that attends to any flavor, so anybody with any technologies or preference could connect to the ecosystem, and this generated a lot of problems. So the basic one was that the providers, the PSP, just had to have one flavor. It was easy for them, but all the clients have to have all flavors because they will have to connect to everyone. So they had to do all the certifications for all the flavors, possible flavors, private key, MTLS, using PAR, without using PAR, and on production, it doesn't work. It always have one problem, something that breaking an institution, and instead of solving the problem, they solve for that lateral connection and break with another and start a cycle that doesn't solve, or it isn't easy to solve. So we managed to create another version of Brazilian profile of FAPI. We select only one flavor of FAPI. We're still using FAPI 1.0, but we are now, everybody have to use private key with PAR. And it was, after we go in production, in less than 1 week, we saw that the quantity of errors on this phase of authentication goes down by half. So we were having about 20% of the API calls with errors, and it goes to 10% just doing this movement to eliminate the other flavors of FAPI. So standards, choosing one flavor, making everyone follow the same path, it was very good for the ecosystem. And we now I believe every decision we're making here in Brazil now is going on that direction, always eliminating multiple choice and imposing only one choice was what working best for us. Don't know if that answers.
Yeah, I mean, I can perhaps give a take on this as well from the UK experience. I mean, what I would say is that, I mean, it's obviously hard to predict because every country has its different sociological issues in the population and tendencies. But I think in general, what we've seen across all these open banking ecosystems is if you build them right, people will use them. New use cases will come up that nobody ever envisioned. You'll get innovation, all things that are good for the country. One of the biggest use cases in the UK was one that nobody predicted. It was actually one of the big uses of open banking payments is for people to pay their taxes. That was actually a process that was problematic for all the players before. Because before that, you had to do manual payments and there was a reference code that you had to get right or the payment wouldn't be matched up to your tax account. And if you do open banking, that reference code just gets passed through automatically and the payment goes to the right place. So before that, it was that was problematic for the banks before, because if the payment didn't have the right reference code or went to the slightly wrong account number, the bank had to go through and chase it. It was problematic for HMRC because they had to sometimes figure out these payments that had come through with the wrong reference code and put them into the right account instead of the one they went through. And it was frustrating for end users if their payment ends up not arriving, or they can't find the reference code they need, or they have to manually copy and paste account numbers around. It's this is the kind of thing that we're trying to achieve with open banking, is making things better for everyone and really unlocking economic growth by that way. So yeah, I think getting these things right and interoperable and having consistent user experiences, the use of these APIs will just grow. This isn't a, I don't know, the word we would use in the UK is boondoggle, which is building something that has no actual purpose. This definitely has a purpose and use.
Victor, if I may, we're 5 minutes out from concluding. I wanted to make sure we addressed Gail's question that she dropped into the chat. I've been waiting to jump in at the appropriate time, but since we're close to concluding, can I raise that question? And that is what we're looking for is, we've covered a lot of technical topics in this session today. We've talked about a lot of our experiences in other ecosystems. What's the Chilean's ecosystem? What's CMF's plan? What's the process to make some of these decisions in the coming weeks and months based on all the considerations that we've discussed today?
Well, I don't know if it is Daniel. Okay. As I think we should have the opportunity to comment in the morning. We in July was passed the very first general rule on the common rules on open finance regulation as a result of the powers conferred by the FinTech law to the CMF. Now it's pending to issue the technical annex of that general rule. The technical annex will cover many of the things we discussed today. And there's a legal vacancy regarding the regulation that is, there are different terms like 24 months, sorry. And currently the working group of the Open Finance System Forum is working and making proposals to the CMF regarding several topics such as authentication, the UX experience, the requirements in terms of infrastructure, central directory. The main directory of information will be provided by the CMF. So the idea to have this kind of conversation with the OpenID Foundation is that we're in the perfect time to adopt any kind of recommendation in terms of would be a healthy and sound solutions regarding the rollout of the standard such FAPI 2.0. So probably in the next month, we obviously it's kind of a set of deliverables, and the idea is to share it with the public and obviously with the OpenID Foundation, which is the current status of such topics. And what we could provide you is a list of that topics and to discuss in which particular topics we see a common place to have a more deepened conversation regarding the collaboration between the CMF and the OpenID Foundation. That's what I think I could say about that today. And I don't know if I know we are running out of time, but the support team of the University Adolfo Ibáñez is connected. And I don't know if they have a question or something that they want to share with the audience. I see Danilo, Romina, and I think Miguel. Sorry. Okay, I see that in the chat that Miguel said that it's okay. So I don't know if you have to share with us a final thoughts.
I want to thank everyone online and in person for coming. It was definitely worth my time to navigate the traffic to drive downtown, which is a rarity for me. I live out in the country. It was great. We should get together and do it again.
Thank you. We really appreciate your enthusiasm.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Joseph, and people online. Let's be in touch.
And we know that especially I think for Joseph, it could be tough in the time zone. So thank you for being with us from the early morning to these hours. It was a pleasure to have from the very authors of the standards, your feedback and your comments and your collaboration.
And Victor, we certainly appreciate yours and your colleagues at the CMF's efforts in coordinating this event today. Highly productive. And on behalf of the foundation, I just wanted to thank John Bradley again for representing us in person in Santiago today. Thanks again, John. Much appreciated. Okay. Thank you all. We'll conclude the session at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Great discussion. Bye.